Hello, I'm Infamous Sphere. What's that? It's time for Infamous Queer!
Pride, darling, pride 95!
Today I'm going to continue talking about Dirk Bogarde's unique portrayal of queer characters. After his performance in Victim, Dirk Bogarde was lauded by critics as being a very talented and brave actor, as the trend for awarding actors for playing gay was apparently present even as far back as the early 1960s. However, one can't really say that the praise was unwarranted. Bogarde took a huge risk, and by doing so, his career took a sharp turn. No longer was Bogarde the handsome, harmless star of comedy movies. No, now he was an actor who gravitated towards roles that were serious, challenging, and sometimes very unpleasant. And that brings us to the sort of gay character that Dirk Bogarde was going to play next. Someone deeply nasty. With that in mind, let's talk about someone else entirely. Joseph Losey is a name that sounds vaguely familiar, although I can't think why. Losey was an American director with a wide range of international theatre experience, who started off his film career with the cinematic punch to the face that was the excruciatingly bad The Boy with Green Hair. A film that, like Victim, came from the screenwriting school of stating the bleeding obvious.
Everywhere you go, people will say, there's the boy with the green hair. And then people will ask, why does he have green hair? So you will tell them, because I am a war orphan, and my green hair is to remind you that war is very bad for children. You must tell all the people, the Russians, Americans, Chinese, British, French, all the people all over the world, that there must not ever be another war. If enough people believe you, there never will be another war, and there never will be any more war orphans.
However, before he had a chance to really make his name in Hollywood, he was kicked out. Surprisingly, this wasn't because of The Boy with Green Hair. No, Joseph Losey got ousted from Hollywood because of that familiar spectre of 1950s Cold War hysteria, Mccarthyism. As a brief reminder, Joseph McCarthy was obsessively purging both government departments and the film, television and media industry of everyone he considered risky to America's traditional values. Many people were blacklisted from Hollywood, and Joseph Losey was one of them. Because he was a communist? Yes, unlike many of the people who were blacklisted for vague communist sympathies, or those who had their careers ruined over their sexuality, Joseph Losey was a genuine card-carrying member of the Communist Party. For once, Joseph McCarthy was right. Not that discriminating against anyone for being interested in the policies of socialism is fair, but it did mean that Joseph Losey had to leave the country and go and work somewhere else, ending up in London. While in England, Losey began to observe the interesting nature of Britain's class system. Here was a country which had a very long history of categorising people based on a series of minute factors. It had more regional accents than any other English-speaking country. It had an absurd system of lords and peerage in books of eminent families. It judged people in ways which Losey, as someone who believed in equality and a classless society, found strange and fascinating. But what could an outsider say about Britain's unique and entrenched history of classism? And could they say more than someone who grew up in the system and knew it inside and out? More importantly, how was Dirk Bogarde going to be involved? This is The Servant.
Let's play master and servant. Come on, let's play master and servant.
Ah yes, The Servant. The film was one of 3 directed by Losey, in collaboration with the playwright Harold Pinter. The Servant is an adaptation of a story by Robin Maugham, the nephew of W. Somerset Maugham, and a man as entrenched in the class system as any other. It's 1960s London, and the threat of social change is hanging in the air, as a young, wealthy and idly rich man, Tony, wakes up in his new and unfurnished house to see a man standing before him. This is Barrett. No, not that Barrett! He has come to be interviewed to work as Tony's manservant, in a scene that I'll have to get back to later. Tony is impressed by Barrett and hires him immediately. Barrett quickly becomes indispensable to Tony, taking care of his every whim. However, Tony's girlfriend Susan doesn't take too kindly to Barrett, seeing him less as a useful and reliable employee, and more as a weird lurking presence around the house and a relic of a stuffy bygone era.
Every time you open a door in this house, that man's outside. He's a peeping Tom.
The two of them butt heads a little, but the situation becomes even more tense when Barrett's sister Vera arrives to work as Tony's maid. While Barrett may have been subtly disruptive, Vera is obviously so, flouncing around the house in a giggling, unprofessional manner and distracting both Barrett and Tony from their work. She eventually sleeps with Tony, who obviously sees her as far more uncomplicated and available than Susan ever was. However, while Tony might be pleased with himself, having a devoted lackey, a girlfriend and a sexual outlet all within easy reach, his smugness is quickly destroyed when he and Susan return home to find Vera and Barrett having sex in his bed.
You realize you've committed a criminal offense?
Criminal, sir?
She's your sister, you bastard!
She's not my sister, sir. So if I might say so, we're both rather in the same boat. He knows precisely what I mean.
After this series of events, Tony throws Barrett and Vera out of his house and Susan leaves in disgust. But while life might now be far less complicated, it hasn't improved for him, and he quickly spirals into depression and alcoholism. While propping up the bar in a London pub, Tony runs into Barrett, who begs him to take him back.
If you can find it in your heart, sir. Give me another chance.
What could go wrong? Well, everything really. It isn't long before Barrett has taken over Tony's life, bullying and manipulating him, while Tony becomes even more helpless in the face of Barrett's control. The first question we have to ask ourselves is why? What makes Barrett the way he is, and why is he so hell-bent on Tony's destruction? At a first glance, Barrett is simply an evil queer, a meddlesome and dangerous servant along the lines of Mrs. Danvers or Thomas. However, in some senses, his wily ways are so much more complex and disturbing than the typical screw-turning servant of old. From the start, Barrett is determined to make himself indispensable. The scene of him arriving at the house to be interviewed and finding Tony hungover and asleep in a chair is almost identical to the very first scene in Jeeves and Wooster, except with Barrett's malevolent intentions instead of Jeeves's benevolent ones. I'm not sure whether or not this was deliberate, but Robin Morm's original story was written over 30 years after P.G. Wodehouse wrote the first Jeeves story, so it's possible that it's a direct reference.
Late night last night, sir?
Too many beers at lunch, that's what it is. Do you drink beer?
No, I don't, sir.
During the course of his interview, Barrett is very obviously coded gay, referring to skills and interests that were typically used to telegraph effeminacy in movies at the time.
Can you cook?
Well, it's, if I might put it this way, sir, cooking is something in which I take a great deal of pride.
Any dish in particular?
Well, my souffles have always received a great deal of praise in the past, sir.
Blue here and there. But I think the overall colour should be white.
Well, mandarin red and fuchsia is a very chic combination this year, sir.
Not overall, surely.
Later, his interest in Tony seems to go a little above and beyond that of a typical detached servant, and the relationship between the two of them becomes very close, a closeness that upsets Susan.
You're too skinny to be a nanny, Barrett. Oh, come on, don't sulk. I didn't mean it.
This is partially because she clearly considers Tony's desire for a servant to be an absurd affectation, as the employment of servants by wealthy and middle-class families had dwindled significantly since the First World War, and by the 1960s it was becoming rare for the average well-to-do person to have one. Male servants in particular were the first to be discarded. As while people continued to hire cleaning ladies and nannies, men no longer wished to hire other men to starch their shirts and fasten their cufflinks. If we go back to Victim, we'll see that Farr has a maid, but he definitely doesn't have a manservant. However, Susan's dislike of Barrett isn't just because she considers his presence a weird relic of 45 years prior. She clearly sees Barrett as a rival for Tony's affections. Part of this is because Tony seems to want male attention, and Barrett gives him something that he can't get from Susan.
I'm sorry I was rude to your servant.
Look, he may be a servant, but he's still a human being.
The interruption of our straightforward gay narrative of a woman rejected by her partner in favour of a man, the obvious spanner in the works, is Vera. Vera is a catalyst, a tool used by Barrett in order to further his ill-defined evil plans. She is an extension of Barrett, and her role in the story makes more sense if you think of her as a device or a surrogate. Vera has sex with Tony in place of Barrett. Vera has sex with Barrett in place of Tony. Vera would probably have sex with Susan too if it came down to it. Vera is simply a more naked manifestation of Barrett's desires and is incredibly malleable. She's whatever the story needs her to be, and she's far from subtle about it. However, while Vera may have been the reason why this carefully managed system, the hierarchy in which Tony understood his place, Susan's place and Barrett's place all came tumbling down, she remains little more than a device. The film isn't about her, it's about the relationship between Barrett and Tony.
You know, sometimes I get the feeling that we're old pals.
That's funny.
Why?
I got the same feeling myself.
Tony is a man who is sure of his place in the world. He can rely on some reassuring truths. In England's very Anglo-centric system of old families, old money and obvious class signifiers, Tony is worthy of respect. Compared to him, Barrett is in many ways inferior. He's smaller, he's darker, he has a northern accent, as opposed to Tony's received pronunciation. He is a man that Tony can feel comfortably superior to.
Say, now look, Barrett, don't you forget your place. You're nothing but a servant in this house.
A servant? I'm nobody's servant.
The idea of the nasty servant is a very common one. As opposed to the loyal servant, who puts their life on hold and lives to serve their master blindingly and without question.
And your life?
Didn't you hear me? I'm the perfect servant. I have no life.
Nasty servants are in some way simply servants who know their own mind and have their own desires, and are using their less than ideal position in society to their own advantage. Thomas and O'Brien from Downton Abbey are probably two of the most familiar examples. They are deeply unsatisfied by being in a position where they have no power and are considered lesser, and so, instead of being humble and obsequious, they are unpleasant, bitchy, manipulative and cruel.
Can't get rid of him just because he talks behind our backs.
There's more than one way to skin a cat.
These are not characters who challenge the concept of class.
Oh, here he is.
Get out of the way, bitch.
These are characters who are inferior and ill-bred, and who dare to commit the sin of refusing to accept their lot in life, like a good peon. You know who else refuses to accept their lot in life and instead chooses to sabotage and destroy everyone else's chance at happiness? Nasty queers. Oh, what a surprise. Almost all of the examples I mentioned are coded or explicitly queer. Indeed, Thomas is a nasty queer servant with a northern accent.
You're sort of I wouldn't say you're an evil character, but there's a...
I'm a gay predator.
What?
I'm a gay predator.
No, I didn't... what? You think he is evil?
I wouldn't be surprised if he even modelled off Barrett himself.
I got you this job and you knew what I wanted in return. So don't complain about it now.
Did you tell her we were expecting visitors? Oh, yes, I did. But I also took the liberty of showing into the drawing room. After all, she's a lady, isn't she?
Leave it alone. However, while Thomas, Danvers and O'Brien are lurking, scheming, meddling and muttering and letting their wicked queerness fill them with hatred for all that is moral, right, good and blonde, I guess, Barrett goes one step further. The Servant isn't just a film about a man who refuses to accept his class in society. This is a film about an abusive relationship. Barrett charms Tony from the start, but starts exerting his control over him as time goes on. He doesn't like Tony's girlfriend and undermines her. When he feels that he's losing control over Tony, he introduces Vera as a way to sabotage Tony and Susan's relationship. But what's most telling isn't how he and Tony act when they're together, it's how he acts when they're apart. After Tony throws Barrett out, Barrett begs Tony to take him back.
Give me another chance, sir. I was so happy there with you. It was like bliss. We can turn over the page. I deceived you. I played you false, I admit that. But she was to blame. It was her fault. She done us both. If you can find it in your heart, sir. Give me another chance.
I can change. I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I love you. I won't do it again. You might recognise this as a very familiar section from the narrative of domestic violence. Like any other domestic abuser, when Barrett is allowed back into Tony's life, he returns to his old pattern of behaviour. isolating Tony from friends and family, keeping him downtrodden, enabling his alcoholism, and openly abusing him.
No, look, listen, I am grateful, honestly.
Yeah,
no, honestly, don't be daft. You know I am.
Yeah, I believe you.
You know, I don't know what I'd do without you.
Well, then go and pour me a glass of brandy.
Well, that's what I suggested in the first place.
But don't just stand there, go and do it!
Now there's no need to pretend that he serves Tony. Now he has complete control. Whether you believe the relationship to be about sexual desire, it's definitely abusive. And abusive relationships are all about power. Most fictional depictions of abusive relationships are between women and men. It's interesting to see an abusive relationship play out between two men, and to see how universal these patterns of abuse really are. The Servant can be interpreted in two ways. Either it's a straightforward cautionary tale about the dangers of letting someone take control of your life, or it's something rather more layered, a fable about class that goes two ways. Is Tony the innocent victim, his only sin being fool enough to trust a lowly convenient member of the working class who only wanted to exploit and usurp him? Or is he being punished for being stupid enough to think that his position of wealth and privilege makes him somehow more worthy than someone of a lower class? A silly man trying his utmost to cling to class divisions long after they become irrelevant.
I'm not going to stand for any more of this.
Take your pigsty somewhere else.
It's not mine, pigsty, it's yours.
You creep.
Nobody talks to me like that.
Do you know what you are?
I know all about your sort.
You're a peasant.
Peasant, am I? Get out of the way, I'll show you what I am. I'll tell you what I am. I'm a gentleman's gentleman, and you're no bloody gentleman.
We never really learn Barrett's motivations. We simply observe his actions.
What do you want from this house?
I'm the servant, miss.
He doesn't seem to covet Tony's money or position in society or girlfriend. He's simply evil for the sake of being evil. Nothing could be more terrifying. Losey's direction is excellent, making what is essentially a filmed play jammed into a claustrophobic setting very visually interesting and engaging. Where Basil Dearden's direction was workmanlike, relying on the changes of setting to create interest, Joseph Losey's is masterful, making a single house come alive, all long shadows and strange angles. Losey employs some obvious but effective tricks in order to set a scene. Barrett frequently wears dark clothing, enhancing his menace, while the well-meaning and ineffectual Tony wears light from head to toe. Losey also uses Bogarde's physicality to his advantage. Bogarde wasn't especially tall, a fact that most directors tended to disguise. In this film, Losey makes him appear small, weedy and lurking, using the stairs to enhance the idea of Barrett and Tony being above and below each other. When the dynamic between them changes, Barrett literally gains the upper hand. There's also some interesting details on the set. When Tony throws Barrett and Vera out of his house and Susan leaves as well, he goes upstairs, throws himself down on a bed and weeps. The wall above the bed is also covered in beefcake posters. The question is the bed Vera's? Or is it Barrett's? Depending on whose bed Tony is crying on, the film goes in a very different direction. Does he truly miss Barrett, whom he seemed to deeply care about, and whom he feels betrayed by? Or is he still hung up on his carnal desires for Vera? Or did he simply use Vera as a substitute for Barrett? In either case, it's not that likely that a woman in the 60s would have festooned the walls of her bedroom in what was the era's equivalent of gay porn. But is the servant homophobic? It's difficult to say. There's definitely a current of homoeroticism running throughout the movie, and the theme of a predatory man preying on a vulnerable one is definitely there. But Barrett doesn't come across as terrifying because he's gay. He comes across as terrifying because of his ability to gain power, and his strange desire to destroy everything that Tony takes for granted. It's certainly not a positive depiction of a queer character, but almost everyone in the movie comes across just as badly, with Tony being morally compromised and spoiled, and Vera being an irritating idiot. Only Susan escapes with any sense of integrity. This is just a story of people destroying each other. As a stark contrast to his turn as Barrett, Bogarde went on to star in another Joseph Losey film, playing a more conventional queer villain in Modesty Blaze?
That one. No, that one. Oh, decisions, both.
Yes, that was Joseph Losey as well. I knew the name sounded familiar. The weird thing is, while Gabriel actually blew people up, Barrett was still more frightening. So that was The Servant, A film that gave Bogarde the chance to play one of the most unsettling queer characters that ever existed, thus turning him even further away from his roots as a matinee idol. So should you watch it? Hell yes. This is one of the most effective movies about an abusive relationship that I've ever seen, having the disturbing tension and drama that the average Lifetime movie completely lacks. I can only hope that Bogarde wasn't anything like Barrett in real life. Well, as far as I've read, there's no indication that he was anywhere near as nasty. Although, come to think of it, his long-term partner was called Tony. I've got to go.
Being a servant is a lesson we're all learning every day. Although it can be fun, sometimes it's a lot of work, and sometimes it means doing things we'd rather not do.
Make me a servant, humble and